Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation or an audiovisual recording for the part of the lesson in Sociology, Unit 3, Lesson 2, where we're going to be looking at rites of passage and values for adolescents becoming an adult. Before we begin, please let me encourage you to open up to the correct part of today's lesson and get ready to answer the key concept questions on the Google Doc. This reading is from Upfront Scholastic, and it really covers some of the basic things that entail becoming an adult. The whole reason why this is part 2 of a 2-part lesson series is because we're going to analyze more closely the essence of what values and norms and I guess you could say characteristics change when you reach different parts of life. So let's go ahead and look at this, and I'm sure you can imagine this is heavily relevant to most teenagers and adolescents, especially during this time. So turning 18 means you legally come of age, but American laws are inconsistent about how old you have to be for various rights and privileges. Last year, Vermont State Senator John Rogers introduced a bill proposing that Vermont outlaw the use of cell phones by anyone under 21. In light of the dangerous and life-threatening consequences of cell phone use by young people, it is clear that persons under 21 years of age are not developmentally mature enough to safely possess them, Rogers, a Democrat, wrote in a bill. The proposed legislation was never meant to be taken seriously, he says. It was in part meant to show absurdity of allowing 18-year-olds to go to war, yet denying them some of the constitutional rights afforded to older Americans. So the right to participation versus the right to protection. If young people can't drink responsibly till they're 21, what would make anyone think they could vote responsibly at age 16, he explains. I think there's a disconnect with all these different ages. As a society, we need to figure out, when are you really an adult? It's a good question. 18 is the age at which Americans legally become adults, responsible for their own actions. All of a sudden, you can vote, get a credit card, serve on a jury, and volunteer to go to war or be drafted if you're a man. But you have to be 21 to buy alcohol, drive for Uber, or gamble at a casino in most states. And state laws that govern many other privileges of adulthood are all over the place on when they take effect. Depending on the state, the age at which young people can get a driver's license ranges from 16 to 21, and in some states, teens can marry as young as 14. Here's some other fast facts. 13 is the age at which Jewish people participate in a religious coming-of-age ceremony known as a bar mitzvah for boys and a bat mitzvah for girls. At age 20, which Japanese people are considered adults, it's traditionally celebrated with a coming-of-age ceremony. At age 16, this is an age at which people can vote in Argentina, Austria, Brazil, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and Scotland. And at age 14, this is an age at which one legally becomes an adult in Albania, the world's lowest age of adulthood. The highest is 21 in Argentina, Cameroon, and Swaziland. As a society, we scramble to make sensible standards about how or when we are mature enough to do certain things. But let's be honest, it's a bit of a mess, says Jeffrey Arnett, a professor of psychology at Clark University in Massachusetts. Not everyone at 18 is the same in terms of their judgment and their self-control. 18 wasn't always the magic number. For a long time in the US, the age of adulthood was 21, just as it was under English common law. The British chose 21 because in medieval times, that was the age of knighthood. But in 1971, the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 18 to 21, and in most states today, 18 is when most of our other rights kick in. We're constantly trying to balance the rights to protection and the rights to participation, says Warren Binford, a law professor at Wilmette University in Oregon. We are a society that loves its liberty, but we're also a society that recognizes that children are unique and special and deserving of protection. Here's a look at what changes on your 18th birthday and what doesn't, and why there's so much variation in these rules about when you become an adult. Now, it should be noted here that there are exceptions. The age of adulthood in Alabama and Nebraska is 19, and in Mississippi it's 21. Some states recognize you as an adult when you graduate from high school. So first here is driving. The age at which states allow young people to drive without restrictions is all over the place. Some states, including Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, allow you to get a regular driver's license at age 16. In Indiana, you have to wait until you're 21. Most states are somewhere in the middle. All states and DC have graduated driver's licensing, or GDL, which of course refers to laws that allow younger drivers on the road with restrictions. But at 18, you can buy a car in your own name. But renting a car is another story. For the most part, rental car companies don't want to deal with you until you're 25, because statistics show that younger drivers get into more accidents. In most states, if you get into an accident as a minor, your parents are legally responsible for any damages. But once you turn 18, the burden falls on you. It's ironic, says Arnett, that driving is one of the first privileges of adulthood in the US. The most dangerous thing that any of us do from 16 to 60 is drive an automobile. So why would we want that being a thing that we do first, he says. In a society like ours, we're so automobile dependent that we want kids to have that ability and that freedom when they're younger. Let's talk about crime and punishment next. If you're under 18 and you commit a crime, courts tend to go easier on you. In many states, your case is handled in a special juvenile courts that and the records are usually sealed and expunged if you stay out of trouble. The juvenile system assumes that you are a child who makes mistakes, says Aaron Kupnick, a professor of sociology and criminal justice at the University of Delaware. You need to be held accountable and punished, but you get a youth discount. Crimes committed after you turn 18, however, automatically send you into the adult criminal justice system, where you can expect much more severe sentences and treatment. Your crimes will stay on your permanent record, making it harder for you to get a job, apartment, or loan. You could also lose your voting privileges, depending on the state that you live in. In some cases, when juveniles commit particularly heinous crimes, they get treated as adults. In the past decade, however, there's been a growing scientific consensus that the part of the brain that guides impulse control and weighs risk versus rewards isn't completely mature in teenagers. This understanding has led to a number of criminal justice reforms and a re-examination of how society should punish young adults. It's now unconstitutional to apply the system's two harshest penalties, the death penalty and life in prison without parole, to juvenile offenders. Next, let's go ahead and look at selective service and the draft. So during the Vietnam War and the wars before it, American men 18 and over could be drafted, which means that if they were called to fight, they had no choice. The draft became so controversial during the Vietnam War that in 1973, Congress switched to an all-volunteer military force. But that doesn't mean you're completely off the hook. Men still have to register with the Federal Selective Service System within 30 days of turning 18. Failure to register is a felony that carries fines up to $250,000 and up to 5 years in prison. You may also be denied a driver's license, student loans, or government jobs. So why do you have to register? If the U.S. gets involved in a war and doesn't have enough volunteers, the draft could be reinstated, and the government would select draftees from the Selective Service roster. In the past decade, with women involved in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, there's been an intensifying debate about whether women should also have to register for the draft at age 18. In March, a federal panel recommended making women's registration a requirement, but Congress has not yet considered this change. Let's go ahead and also look at voting. So the draft was one reason young protesters during the Vietnam War staged sit-ins and burned their draft cards. And what really got under their skin? Millions of 18-year-olds were drafted to fight in Vietnam, yet they didn't have any real power to affect America's war policy, because in most states you had to be 21 to vote. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote became the rallying cry of the movement of lowering the voting age to 18. America's leaders listened, and in 1971, the 26th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified. The 26th Amendment sets 18 as the minimum age for voting in local, state, or federal elections. But it doesn't prevent cities or states from allowing people younger than 18 to vote. And in recent years, there's been a growing debate over lowering the voting age. A few U.S. cities already allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections, and lawmakers in California, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island are considering lowering the voting age to 16 or 17. But some people say that lowering the voting age is unnecessary since young voters have always voted at lower rates than older voters. However, in the 2018 midterm elections, voter turnout among 18 to 29-year-olds surged to 36% from 20% in the 2014 midterms, and that's still much lower than the overall 2018 turnout rate at 53%, but it could be an indication that when it comes to voting, more young people are ready to exercise their right to be heard as adults. So as you can see, there's a lot to be said here about the different ways and means upon which you look at maturity and adulthood with different rights and responsibilities of becoming an adult. Adolescence is quite the interesting stage in the sense that in many ways, many adolescents are ready for the next phase of life, which is adulthood. But when you take a deeper, closer look at some of these things here, as far as the rites of passage and, rights and responsibilities, it becomes a little bit more convoluted and complex. Only time will tell whether or not there's going to be any significant changes to any one of these thresholds for adulthood and rights and responsibilities, but I look forward to paying close attention, watching, and evaluating, and you should too. Good luck completing the rest of the lesson, and thank you very much for tuning in.